For years, my sister told everyone I was completely broke after I sank every last dollar into a patch of dead dirt. I drove a beat-up truck. I wore the same old flannel shirts. To my image-obsessed parents, I was always the dumb one. They thought I was a pathetic failure until I sold that exact farm for $45 million. I told absolutely no one. 4 days later, what my family tried to do to me made me incredibly grateful I kept my mouth shut. My name is Audrey. I am 33 years old, and my family just made the most expensive mistake of their entire lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated your worth. The clinking of crystal glasses came to an abrupt halt as a thick legal document slammed directly onto my dinner plate. Hot turkey gravy splashed across the front of my faded flannel shirt, staining the fabric. I looked up from my ruined meal to see my father Richard standing at the head of his pristine mahogany dining table in suburban Connecticut. "Sign right there on the bottom line, Audrey," he commanded, pointing a manicured finger at the damp paper. I wiped gravy from my cheek and stared at the document. It was a collateral agreement. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely level despite the sudden pounding in my chest. "Your brother-in-law faces a liquidity issue at his firm," my father stated, not bothering to sit back down. "Kendrick needs a bridge loan to cover some immediate market fluctuations. We are using that useless 300-acre dirt patch of yours down in Texas to secure the capital." I blinked, looking across the table at Kendrick. My African-American brother-in-law sat comfortably in his tailored Italian suit, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. As a high-level asset manager at an elite hedge fund, Kendrick had always treated me like a charity case. He took a slow sip of his drink and offered me a condescending smirk. "Look at it this way," Audrey Kendrick said, his tone dripping with arrogant authority. "You are a soil scientist. You play in the mud for a living. That land you bought outside Austin is dead soil. It yields zero agricultural profit. It is a depreciating liability sitting out there doing nothing but gathering dust. By signing this agreement, you are finally making your little farm financially useful to the people who actually know how to generate real wealth. I am practically doing you a favor by integrating your dead asset into a high-yield financial vehicle." The sheer audacity of his statement hung heavily in the air of the formal dining room. I looked from Kendrick to my sister Brittany. At 31, Brittany was the undisputed golden child of the family, a luxury real estate agent who spent her days obsessed with social media optics and maintaining a fake wealthy lifestyle. She sat next to Kendrick, deliberately adjusting her wrist so the dining room chandelier would catch the sparkle of her brand-new diamond watch. "Kendrick just bought me this Rolex to celebrate his upcoming promotion," Brittany announced, shooting a look of pure disgust at my gravy-stained flannel. "The least you can do is sign the paper, Audrey. We all know you are completely broke." I pushed my chair back slightly, ignoring the document sitting in a pool of cranberry sauce. "I am not putting my land up as collateral for Kendrick to make risky hedge fund bets," I said firmly. "My mother." Patricia instantly slammed her wine glass onto the table. "You have always been incredibly selfish, Audrey," she erupted, her face flushing red with sudden fury. "Just like 3 years ago, when you drained every single penny of your savings to buy that useless patch of Texas dirt instead of helping your sister pay off her credit card debt. Brittany needed that money for her personal branding, but you chose to throw it away on a pipe dream." My mother's voice grew louder, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings of their pristine home. "You are 33 years old, driving a vehicle that looks like it belongs in a junkyard, and you still refuse to help the successful members of this family when they ask for a simple favor." I looked around the table at my family. To them, I was not a daughter or a sister. I was merely a resource to be plundered, an uneducated failure, whose only value lay in whatever assets they could extract from me to fuel their illusions of grandeur. Kendrick leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to use his intimidating corporate presence to corner me. "Listen to me very carefully, Audrey," he said, dropping the friendly facade. You do not understand economics. You do not understand high-level finance. My fund needs liquidity right now to finalize a massive deal, and your signature is the only thing standing between this family and generational wealth. Sign the document. I picked up the stack of legal papers. My father smiled, assuming I was conforming to his unreasonable demands. Instead, I gripped the pages and tore the contract directly in half, letting the pieces drop onto the floor. I simply told you no. I stated very calmly and clearly. My father's face contorted into a mask of pure, absolute rage. He pointed a shaking finger straight at the front door. "Get out of my house right this instant," he bellowed. "If you walk out that door, you are no longer a part of this family. I only have one true daughter, and her name is Brittany. You are now officially and completely disowned, Audrey. You are simply the absolute dumbest mistake this family has ever made." I did not shed a tear. I simply turned my back on the dining room and walked down the pristine hallway of the home I had grown up in. Behind me, the heavy silence of the house shattered as my mother began screaming about my ungrateful nature. I pushed open the heavy oak front door and stepped out into the crisp November air. The cold wind hit my face, bringing immediate relief from the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' house. I walked down the long paved driveway toward my beat-up Ford truck, parked at the very edge of the property. My father had deliberately asked me to park on the street so my rusty bumper would not stain his immaculate driveway or sit next to Kendrick and Brittany's least luxury vehicles. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled the door shut. The worn fabric of the seat felt like a comforting embrace compared to the rigid dining chairs inside. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out my phone. The screen was lit up with several notifications, but one specific email caught my attention immediately. It was from the senior partner at the corporate law firm representing me. I opened the message and read the single line of text. The subject line read, "Apex Semiconductors acquisition confirmed." The body of the email was brief and strictly professional. "The transfer of the deed has been finalized, and the $45 million payment has cleared escrow. The funds will be available in your primary accounts by Monday morning. Please confirm receipt." A slow smile spread across my face. I typed out a quick confirmation and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I turned the key in the ignition, and the old engine roared to life. As I drove away from the sprawling Connecticut suburb, I thought about the sheer absurdity of the conversation that had just taken place. Kendrick had sat there in his custom Italian suit, swirling his expensive bourbon and confidently explaining to me that my land was a dead asset. He had used every piece of condescending finance jargon he could remember from his hedge fund training to convince me that I was holding onto a depreciating liability. He truly believed he was the smartest person in the room. He had no idea that the soil scientist he loved to mock had just secured a deal that dwarfed his entire career portfolio. My mother's furious words echoed in my mind as I navigated the dark, winding roads. She had called me selfish for draining my savings 3 years ago to buy the farm outside Austin. What she conveniently left out of her rant was the actual reason she had been so angry at the time. Brittany had racked up $60,000 in credit card debt, trying to maintain her image as a highly successful luxury real estate agent. She was buying designer bags, taking expensive vacations for social media content, and leasing cars she could not afford. My parents had demanded that I hand over my hard-earned savings to bail Brittany out of her financial mess. They claimed it was my duty as a sister to support her personal branding. When I refused and used my money to purchase the 300 acres in Texas instead, they treated it as a personal betrayal. They called it a dirt patch. They mocked my calloused hands and the dirt under my fingernails. They could not understand why a woman with a graduate degree would choose to work the earth instead of climbing the corporate ladder. But my background in soil science had given me a unique perspective. I had recognized that the land was situated perfectly over a stable subterranean aquifer, making it an ideal location for high-tech industrial development. I knew the tech boom in Austin was expanding outward, and it was only a matter of time before major corporations started looking for massive plots of land with reliable water access for cooling massive server farms and semiconductor manufacturing plants. I had played the long game while my family played dress-up. Brittany flaunting her new diamond watch at the dinner table was the perfect metaphor for their entire existence. Kendrick had bought her that Rolex to celebrate a promotion he was desperate to secure, but I knew the truth about his financial situation. The hedge fund he worked for was built on smoke and mirrors. He was constantly chasing the next big deal to cover up his previous losses. He wanted to leverage my farm not for a simple bridge loan, but to save himself from a catastrophic margin call. They were drowning in debt and desperate for a lifeline, but their arrogance prevented them from treating me with even a basic level of respect. I merged onto the highway, heading back to my small rented apartment. The heater in my truck rattled loudly, but I did not care. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely free. My father had explicitly disowned me tonight. He had severed the last remaining tie that bound me to their toxic expectations and relentless criticism. By kicking me out of his house and officially declaring me the dumbest mistake the family had ever made, he had absolved me of any lingering guilt. I no longer had to pretend to respect their shallow values. I no longer had to sit quietly while Kendrick mansplained economics, or while Brittany mocked my clothes. The $45 million sitting in my newly created private accounts meant absolute independence. I had signed a strict non-disclosure agreement regarding the sale to Apex Semiconductors, so my family would not discover the truth through public channels anytime soon. They would continue to believe I was the impoverished failure of the family, driving a beat-up truck and wearing stained flannel shirts. They would continue to scheme and plot to save themselves from the financial ruin they had brought upon themselves. It had been 4 days since the Thanksgiving disaster. I sat at the small Formica dining table in my cramped apartment, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The non-disclosure agreement was ironclad. Apex Semiconductors demanded absolute secrecy until the final zoning permits cleared City Council, which suited my purposes perfectly. The $45 million was sitting safely in a newly established high-yield trust, shielded entirely from public record, and more importantly, from my family's prying eyes. My phone had been ringing incessantly for 96 hours. I had watched the caller ID flash with my father's name, my mother's name, and Brittany's name over and over. They were cycling through tactics. First came the angry texts demanding an apology for ruining dinner. Then came the guilt-tripping messages from my mother, talking about family loyalty and how I was breaking my father's heart. I ignored all of them. I knew exactly what was fueling their relentless outreach. It was not love, and it was certainly not regret over disowning me. It was raw, unadulterated panic. Kendrick needed capital to save his crumbling hedge fund, and my 300 acres of Texas soil was their only remaining lifeline. They were running out of time, and their desperation was about to take a terrifying turn. On Tuesday morning, the incessant ringing stopped, replaced by the notification of a single lengthy voicemail from my sister. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat back in my chair, and hit play. Brittany's voice filled my quiet apartment, stripped of her usual fake sweetness. The mask was completely gone, replaced by a vicious, calculating tone that made my blood run cold. "Listen to me very carefully, you selfish little brat," Brittany hissed through the speaker. "You think you can just walk away and leave this family high and dry? Kendrick needs that land right now. Since you want to act like an obstinate child playing in the mud, we are going to treat you like one." I just got off the phone with Kendrick's legal team. We are filing a petition for a medical conservatorship first thing Monday morning. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting her words sink in. A conservatorship, the legal mechanism used to strip elderly or severely mentally ill individuals of their basic human rights and hand control of their assets over to a guardian. Brittany was not finished. "We are going to tell a judge all about your little obsession with dirt," she spat. "We are going to testify that you drained your entire life savings to buy a worthless plot of dead land in Texas because you have severe delusions. Mom and Dad are totally on board. They are willing to swear under oath that your mental health has been deteriorating for years and that you are completely unfit to manage your own financial affairs." Once the judge grants the emergency injunction, I will be named your legal guardian. I will hold the deed to the farm, and I will sign the collateral agreement for Kendrick myself. You are going to lose everything anyway, Audrey. You might as well make it easy on yourself and just sign the papers now before we drag your name through the mud in open court. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I placed my phone face down on the table. The sheer audacity of her threat was breathtaking. My own sister, backed by my parents, was plotting to commit perjury to legally declare me insane, simply to steal my property. A weaker person might have panicked. A younger version of myself might have called them immediately crying and begging them not to do it, offering to sign anything just to keep my autonomy. But the woman sitting in that apartment was not a victim anymore. I was a woman with $45 million in the bank and a world-class legal team at my disposal. I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, sharp focus. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to Marcus, the senior partner at my law firm in Austin. He answered on the second ring. I have a situation that requires immediate monitoring. I told him, my voice perfectly level. My family is preparing to file a petition for a medical conservatorship against me here in Connecticut. They intend to claim I am mentally incompetent to manage my assets, specifically targeting the Texas property. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Marcus was a veteran litigator who had seen every dirty trick in the corporate playbook, but even he was taken aback by the sheer malice of a family attempting to legally kidnap their own daughter. Do you want us to intervene and block the filing? Marcus asked, his tone immediately shifting into combat mode. We can file an emergency counter-motion and bury them in cease and desist orders before they even reach the courthouse steps. I looked out the small window of my apartment, watching the morning traffic roll by. No, I said softly. Do not block a single thing they do. Let them spend the money to draft the petition. Let them file it with the probate court. Let them walk right into the trap. I want you to simply monitor the court dockets. Do not alert them that I have retained counsel. Let them believe I am completely helpless and terrified. Marcus understood my strategy instantly. You want them to commit to perjury on public record, he clarified. Exactly, I replied. They rely on the illusion that I am a broke, uneducated failure. They think they can bulldoze me because I cannot afford to fight back. We are going to let them build their entire case on that ridiculous assumption. Keep the agreement completely watertight. Marcus agreed, and we quickly ended the call. Let them file their papers. I was ready for war. The morning after Brittany left her unhinged voicemail about the medical conservatorship, I sat in the conference room of my lawyer's Austin office. Marcus and I were reviewing the preliminary paperwork my sister had actually filed. They were moving incredibly fast, clearly driven by an impending financial cliff. As Marcus highlighted the blatant lies in Brittany's sworn affidavit, my phone vibrated sharply against the table. A push notification from my home security app flashed across the screen. Motion detected in the living room. I tapped the notification, and the live feed from the camera, hidden in my bookshelf, materialized. My breath caught in my throat. My mother, Patricia, was standing in the middle of my small living room. She was wearing her signature designer trench coat, looking entirely out of place against my thrifted furniture. In her hand, she held the silver emergency key I had given her 5 years ago. I had explicitly asked for it back, and she had sworn she threw it away. Clearly, that was a calculated lie. I watched in stunned silence as she began opening drawers and flipping through the mail on my kitchen counter. She was not just visiting, she was snooping. I reached out and tapped the audio icon. The sound of her voice crackled through my phone. She held her cell phone to her ear, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. I am inside the apartment right now, Kendrick, my mother whispered aggressively, pulling out the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I am looking for her banking details, just like you asked. Yes, I understand the urgency. If we can find where she keeps her operational funds for that farm, we can transfer the capital before the judge even signs the conservatorship order. We just need enough liquid cash to cover your margin call. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. My mother was actively committing burglary, conspiring with my brother-in-law to steal whatever savings they thought I possessed. They were behaving like common criminals. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers tear through my files. She tossed aside my tax returns and utility bills, throwing them carelessly onto the floor. Suddenly, she stopped. She pulled out a faded manila folder, and a triumphant smile spread across her face. I knew exactly what she had found. It was a file containing the paperwork for a joint checking account my parents had opened with me when I was 18 years old. My mother had kept her name on the account. I had stopped using it the moment I graduated, but I had never officially closed it down. Patricia dropped her phone onto my sofa and pulled her expensive tablet from her designer tote bag. I watched the live feed as she sat down at my dining table, her fingers flying across the touchscreen. Because her name was still technically listed as a joint holder on that legacy account, she did not even need to steal my passwords. She simply navigated to the bank's portal, entered her own credentials, and bypassed my security entirely. She was fully expecting to find a massive cash reserve, the operational budget I supposedly used to maintain my 300 acres of Texas soil. I watched her face intently through the camera lens. The triumphant, greedy smile vanished in a fraction of a second. Her jaw dropped and her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. The account she had just successfully breached did not contain the hundreds of thousands of dollars Kendrick desperately needed to save his sinking hedge fund. It contained exactly $12.43. That was the minimum balance required to keep the account from closing due to inactivity. My mother stared at the screen, tapping it violently, as if she believed the display was broken. Her face flushed a deep, angry crimson. She slammed her hands down on my table, knocking my pen holder onto the floor. Less than 10 seconds later, my cell phone vibrated again in my hand. It was a text message from her. I opened the text. "You are an absolute disgrace to this family," the message read. "I just checked your old college account to see if you needed financial help, and you are completely broke. $12, Audrey. Really? You are 33 years old and you are a penniless parasite. You chose to buy that useless dirt patch in Texas, and now you have absolutely nothing. You could have helped your sister and Kendrick, but instead you chose to be a selfish failure. Do not ever ask us for a single dime." I read the message twice, letting the sheer hypocrisy wash over me. She had broken into my home, violated my privacy, and attempted to steal my money under Kendrick's instructions. Yet because her theft was unsuccessful, she immediately twisted the narrative to make herself the victim of my supposed financial incompetence. She called me a parasite while trying to drain my account. I looked at Marcus, who had been watching my face. "Are you all right, Audrey?" he asked quietly. I handed him the phone, letting him read the vicious text message and showing him the screenshot of my mother holding the stolen key. "I am perfectly fine," I replied, my voice hard. "I finally understand exactly what we are dealing with. They are not just mean, Marcus. They are dangerously desperate for cash. Kendrick is facing total financial ruin and dragging my parents down with him. They are cornered animals and they will break any law to survive." Marcus reviewed the evidence. "This constitutes illegal entry and attempted theft. Do we call the police?" I shook my head. "No. Let them think I am a penniless failure. Let them proceed with their fraudulent conservatorship based on the delusion that I have nothing but dead dirt. They have absolutely no idea they are stepping into a $45 million trap. File the response, Marcus. Let them dig their own graves." My mother's furious text message confirmed my worst suspicions. My family was not just arrogant and cruel. They were acting with the erratic unpredictability of a cornered animal. If Patricia was willing to break into my apartment and attempt to steal from a joint checking account, Kendrick's financial situation was far worse than a simple margin call. I needed to know exactly what kind of fire was burning beneath his perfectly tailored suits and arrogant smirk. First thing Wednesday morning, I contacted a highly exclusive private intelligence firm based out of Manhattan. I did not hire a standard private investigator who chased cheating spouses. I retained a former forensic accountant who specialized in dissecting high-level corporate fraud. His name was Elias, and his retainer was exorbitant, a fee I paid immediately from my newly funded account without a second thought. I gave Elias a single directive: I wanted him to tear apart Kendrick's supposedly flawless hedge fund career and find the rotting core I knew was hiding just beneath the surface. I wanted every transaction, every hidden debt, and every shell company laid bare. Elias went to work immediately utilizing a network of industry insiders and deep financial databases that ordinary citizens could never access. For 48 long hours, I quietly continued my normal routine to maintain the illusion of my pitiful existence. I drove my beat-up Ford truck to the local grocery store. I wore my faded flannel shirts. I ignored the continuous barrage of threatening voicemails from Brittany, who promised to drag me into probate court and expose my supposed mental illness to the world. She detailed how my obsession with soil was a clear indicator of cognitive decline. Every word she recorded was simply adding another layer of concrete evidence to the perjury case my legal team was quietly building against her. While Brittany wasted her breath leaving unhinged messages, Elias was methodically unearthing the dark reality of my brother-in-law's financial portfolio. By Friday afternoon, Elias sent a heavily encrypted file to my secure email address. I sat at my small dining table, the same spot where I had watched my mother rummage through my files on the hidden security camera, and opened the document. The report was an absolute masterpiece of forensic accounting detailing a web of financial crimes so severe they took my breath away. Kendrick was not just a failing hedge fund manager dealing with a temporary market fluctuation. He was an active criminal standing on the precipice of total destruction. According to the internal documents Elias had managed to acquire, Kendrick had been hemorrhaging client money for the past 18 months. To cover his initial losses and maintain the lavish lifestyle Brittany demanded, he had started diverting funds from his highest net worth clients. He had secretly funneled those diverted assets into a series of highly volatile, entirely unauthorized cryptocurrency bets. He was chasing staggering returns, desperately hoping a massive digital windfall would allow him to quietly replace the stolen client capital before anyone noticed the discrepancy. Instead, the crypto market had crashed, wiping out the stolen funds completely. Elias had uncovered the exact timeline of Kendrick's impending doom. His firm was scheduled to undergo a comprehensive internal audit at the end of the current month. The auditors would inevitably discover the glaring holes in his client accounts. Kendrick desperately needed to replace exactly $2 million in cash before that massive audit commenced. If he failed to deposit that exact sum, he would not just be fired. He would be facing federal embezzlement charges and a lengthy prison sentence. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with perfect crystal clarity. That was why Kendrick had ambushed me with the collateral agreement at the Thanksgiving dinner table. That was why he had been so aggressive, trying to use his intimidating corporate presence to bully me into signing over my land. He had researched the property values in the Austin area and discovered that my 300 acres had appreciated significantly since I purchased them. He knew he could use the deed to secure a quick, high-interest predatory loan to cover the $2 million he had stolen. He was going to leverage my farm, take the cash to save himself from federal prison, and leave me to default on the massive life-destroying loan. When I tore up the contract, I had essentially handed him a prison sentence. The desperation was intoxicating. My parents were completely oblivious to the criminal reality. They were blindly supporting a man who was moments away from federal indictment, risking their own freedom to aid an embezzler. As I finished reading the final page of the forensic report, my cell phone chimed sharply against the table. I picked it up and saw a text message from Kendrick. I opened the message and read his words. He was clinging desperately to his false sense of superiority. "My lawyers are filing the mental incompetence petition on Monday," the text read. "You had your chance to do this the easy way, Audrey. Now we are taking control of your assets by force. Kiss your farm goodbye." A cold, hard laugh escaped my lips. He was standing on the tracks of an oncoming freight train, yet he still believed he was conducting the locomotive. The sheer arrogance was truly staggering, a blind plunge into total disaster. I picked up my phone and immediately dialed the direct line to Marcus, my lead attorney in Austin. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and ready for instruction. "I have the entire picture now. I told him calmly, my eyes scanning the embezzlement evidence on my laptop screen. Kendrick just confirmed his legal strategy. Marcus paused, waiting for my directive. "Do we strike now?" he asked. I smiled, feeling the absolute power of the $45 million sitting in my accounts. "Do not block the filing," I instructed my attorney. "Let them walk right into the trap." Monday morning arrived with a suffocating humidity that hung heavy over the local probate courthouse. I walked through the heavy double doors, wearing my scuffed leather work boots, a pair of worn denim jeans, and a faded red flannel shirt. I looked exactly like the struggling, delusional dirt farmer my family had painted me out to be. My appearance was a carefully crafted costume designed to feed their towering arrogance. As I took my seat on the rigid wooden bench in the hallway outside the courtroom, the heavy oak doors swung open again. Kendrick and Brittany glided into the corridor, flanked by a loud, red-faced man carrying a scuffed leather briefcase. My sister and brother-in-law were dressed for a high society gala rather than a preliminary injunction hearing. Brittany wore a pristine white tailored suit that cost more than my first car, while Kendrick sported a custom Italian navy blazer and a silk tie. They projected an aura of absolute dominance, but I could see the glistening sweat on his forehead and the frantic darting movements of his eyes. The clock was ticking loudly in his head. The man beside them was their legal counsel, a famously aggressive low-tier bulldog attorney known for taking desperate cases on credit. He was loud, brash, and entirely out of his depth, but Kendrick clearly thought pure volume could bulldoze a judge into signing over my assets. A moment later, Marcus arrived. If my outfit was a costume, Marcus had elevated his disguise to an art form. The senior partner of a world-class corporate litigation firm, a man whose retainer alone required a six-figure wire transfer, shuffled down the courthouse hallway, looking like a completely frazzled, overworked public defender. He wore a rumpled, off-the-rack beige suit that was slightly too large in the shoulders, a mismatched striped tie, and a pair of scuffed loafers. He carried a bulging, disorganized canvas messenger bag, from which several loose papers threatened to spill onto the floor. As he sat down next to me, he intentionally dropped a pen and fumbled awkwardly to retrieve it. I watched Brittany lean over and whisper something into his ear, a wicked, triumphant smirk stretching across her face. Kendrick let out a short, dismissive laugh, eyeing Marcus with total contempt. They fully believed I had scraped together my last few pennies to hire a bumbling, bottom-of-the-barrel lawyer who would fold under the slightest pressure. They thought this hearing would be a quick 5-minute formality before they marched to the bank with my property deed. The bailiff called our case and we all filed into the austere courtroom. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, took her seat at the bench and peered down at us over her reading glasses. The moment she called for opening remarks, the bulldog lawyer leaped to his feet, practically shouting his arguments across the room. He painted a tragic, wildly fictitious picture of my life. He claimed I was suffering from severe untreated cognitive decline. He dramatically waved his hands, stating that I had drained my entire life savings to purchase a barren, utterly worthless plot of dirt in Texas due to paranoid delusions. He swore that I was a danger to my own financial safety and that my loving, successful sister and her prominent hedge fund manager husband were simply stepping in to save me from complete destitution. The lawyer demanded an immediate emergency injunction to freeze my assets and transfer total conservatorship to Brittany before I could do any more damage to myself. Kendrick sat at the petitioner table with his chest puffed out, radiating smug satisfaction. He looked at me with a cold, victorious glare, entirely certain that the gavel was about to strike in his favor. He was already spending my $2 million in his head. When the bulldog finally sat down out of breath and looking incredibly pleased with his performance, Judge Harrison turned her gaze to our table. She looked at Marcus, taking in his rumpled suit and disorganized bag with a hint of skepticism. Marcus stood up slowly, clearing his throat with a nervous, reedy cough. He fumbled with the clasp of his canvas bag, pretending to struggle as he pulled out a thick, perfectly bound stack of documents. "I apologize, Your Honor." Marcus muttered, his voice intentionally meek and unassuming. "My client does not contest their very deep concern for her safety. However, we do have some recent medical documentation that might clarify the situation. Marcus walked forward and handed the stack to the bailiff. The bulldog lawyer rolled his eyes, clearly expecting a scribbled note from a holistic wellness coach. Instead, Judge Harrison opened the file and the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly. Marcus had not brought one simple medical note. He had brought flawless, airtight, completely unassailable psychological evaluations from 3 of the most highly respected board-certified psychiatrists in the state. The evaluations were comprehensive, utilizing extensive cognitive testing, neurological scans, and behavioral assessments. Each separate report concluded with absolute certainty that I was in perfect mental health, possessing an exceptionally sharp, highly capable mind, with zero evidence of cognitive decline delusions or financial incompetence. Judge Harrison read the first page, flipped to the second, and then looked up at the lawyer with an expression of pure, unadulterated icy rage. The smug smile evaporated instantly as the judge slammed the file down onto her heavy wooden desk. Counsel Judge Harrison barked, her voice echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. "You come into my courtroom requesting an emergency injunction to strip a woman of her basic human rights, claiming severe delusions, and yet I am looking at definitive, irrefutable medical proof that your claims are completely baseless." Kendrick leaped out of his chair, his face draining of all color. "Your Honor, please, those documents must be forged," he stammered. He panicked, realizing his money was permanently gone. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom slammed shut behind Kendrick and Brittany, severing the tense silence they left in their wake. I remained seated at the defense table, watching through the small glass pane as Kendrick violently shoved his way past a group of lingering attorneys in the corridor. The absolute panic radiating from his rigid posture was undeniable. His meticulously planned emergency injunction had evaporated into thin air, utterly demolished by a stack of irrefutable medical documents. The fast track to my Texas property was permanently blocked. Marcus calmly gathered his papers, slipping them back into his battered canvas bag with a satisfied nod. The trap had worked flawlessly. They were out of time, out of legal options, and rapidly running out of sanity. For the next 24 hours, my phone was completely silent. There were no aggressive text messages from my mother, no threatening legal emails from Kendrick, and certainly no further attempts to breach my bank accounts. They were regrouping. I knew Kendrick was currently staring down the barrel of an impending federal audit with a $2 million deficit hanging over his head. The legal route would now require a protracted civil battle that could take months or even years to resolve. He did not have months. He had until the end of the month. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat by the window watching the street below, simply waiting for the inevitable pivot. When an arrogant predator realizes force will not work, they immediately switch to manipulation. On Thursday afternoon, the silence finally broke. The caller ID illuminated with Brittany's name. I let it ring 4 times, taking a slow sip of coffee to steady my breathing, and tapped the screen to answer. I did not say a word, letting the line sit open. Audrey. Brittany breathed into the receiver. Her voice was thick, wet, and trembling with manufactured emotion. The vicious, calculating tone from her voicemail days earlier had completely vanished, replaced by the fragile, weeping pitch of a deeply concerned sister. "Audrey, please do not hang up. I am so incredibly sorry about the courtroom." I kept my voice small and hesitant, perfectly mirroring the broken woman she desperately needed me to be. "You tried to declare me legally insane, Brittany," I murmured, letting a slight tremor slip into my words. "You told a judge I was delusional." "I know," she sobbed, the performance reaching a theatrical peak. "I was just so scared for you. Kendrick and I were looking at your financial situation and we panicked. We thought you were drowning out there. Mom told us about your checking account having only $12 left. We thought you were starving, Audrey. We thought the stress of that awful farm had completely broken your mind. The conservatorship was just a desperate attempt to protect you from yourself." The sheer audacity of her lie was staggering. She was attempting to reframe an attempted theft and legal kidnapping as an act of profound familial devotion. I remained silent, offering her nothing but the sound of my slow, deliberate breathing. She took the bait and rushed to fill the void. Listen to me, Brittany continued, her tone shifting into a soothing maternal cadence. Kendrick and I had a long talk last night. We cannot let pride stand in the way of family. We know you are struggling with the property taxes on that Texas land. We know it is a massive, useless burden dragging you down into poverty. We want to help you escape it completely free and clear. Help me, I repeated softly, injecting just enough confusion to keep her talking. Yes, she said quickly, eagerness bleeding through her fake tears. Kendrick went to the bank this morning. He is taking out a personal high-interest loan just for you. He is pulling strings to secure $50,000 in liquid cash. We want to buy the farm from you, Audrey. We will take that barren dirt off your hands, assume all the tax liabilities, and give you $50,000 to start a brand new life. You will never have to worry about starving again. I stared at the wall, marveling at the sheer, unadulterated greed radiating through the speaker. She was offering me $50,000 for 300 acres of prime, rapidly appreciating commercial development land that sat squarely over a massive lithium deposit. The property was worth at least $45 million, and Kendrick planned to immediately leverage it for a $2 million predatory loan to cover his embezzlement tracks. They were offering me pennies to save themselves from federal prison, wrapping their theft in a bow of sisterly charity. $50,000, I whispered, letting my voice crack as if overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the sum. That is a lot of money, Brittany, but the farm, it is all I have left. I know it is hard to let go, she cooed, sensing my supposed weakness. But you have to be realistic, Audrey. You cannot eat dirt. You cannot pay rent with empty acreage. Kendrick is taking a massive financial hit to do this for you, but we love you. We just want to see you safe. I have the purchase agreement right here on my desk. I can overnight it to you right now. You just sign the deed over and the money will be in your account by tomorrow morning. The desperation was palpable. She was practically vibrating with anxiety, ready to shove a pen into my hand through the phone. They needed that deed immediately. Every second that passed brought Kendrick closer to the auditor's axe. I need to think about it, I replied, my voice trembling. It is a huge decision. I need to sleep on it. Just give me a few days, Brittany. Let me process everything. Audrey, wait, she gasped. We need to do this now. I hung up, leaving them in agonizing suspense. The silence in my apartment after hanging up on Brittany was absolute perfection. By refusing to give her an immediate answer, I had effectively locked my entire family in a self-constructed purgatory. Kendrick had federal auditors breathing down his neck, counting the days until his massive embezzlement was exposed. Brittany was likely pacing her immaculate hardwood floors, terrified of losing her luxury vehicles and country club memberships. My phone remained completely dark for 3 full days. I knew they were panicking, unable to push too hard, for fear I would spook and refuse their generous $50,000 offer, yet desperate enough to be losing their minds over my delayed response. On Thursday morning, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived via certified courier. The return address belonged to my parents, Richard and Patricia. It was an invitation to their 40th wedding anniversary gala, an extravagant event they had been planning for nearly a year. The gala was to be held at the most exclusive country club in Connecticut, a sprawling venue where my father practically lived. I slid my finger under the gold-embossed seal and pulled out the thick cardstock. It was the standard formal invitation, listing the date, which happened to be the upcoming Saturday, the location, and the black tie dress code. But tucked behind the main invitation was a smaller handwritten note on my mother's personalized stationery. I recognized Patricia's sharp, precise handwriting immediately. The note did not contain a warm greeting or an expression of hope that I would attend. Instead, it was a list of conditions. Audrey, the note read, "Your father and I have decided to allow you to attend our anniversary celebration. But given your recent behavior and the tremendous stress you have caused this family, your presence comes with strict expectations. You are not welcome as a guest. I have spoken with the catering director. You will arrive at 3 o'clock sharp through the service entrance. You will be provided a uniform, and you will work as a cater waiter for the duration of the evening. We feel this will build character and help you earn our forgiveness for your selfish actions. Furthermore, Brittany has prepared the final purchase documents for your farm. You will meet her in the club's executive office immediately following the dessert service to sign the deed over. If you refuse these terms, you are officially disowned and dead to us. I read the words 3 times, letting the sheer, unfiltered malice wash over me. My parents were throwing a lavish party to celebrate themselves, and they wanted their own daughter serving hors d'oeuvres to their wealthy friends as a public punishment. They wanted to humiliate me, break my spirit, and then force me to sign away my property while I was exhausted and degraded. It was a perfectly orchestrated trap designed to strip me of everything I owned while simultaneously putting me in my place. They still thought I was completely broke, desperate for their approval, and stupid enough to fall for their $50,000 lifeline. As I stared at the insulting note, my laptop chimed with an incoming video call. It was Marcus, my lead attorney. I accepted the call, tossing the invitation onto my desk. Marcus looked incredibly sharp sitting in his Austin office with a file open in front of him. Audrey, he began, his voice buzzing with barely contained excitement. Our forensic accountant, Elias, just sent over an addendum to Kendrick's financial portfolio. We were looking deeply into how Kendrick planned to secure that $2 million predatory loan using your property as collateral. It turns out the loan was only a temporary bridge. Kendrick was not just trying to steal your land to cover his tracks. He actually had a buyer lined up to flip the property immediately for a massive commission. I leaned forward, suddenly intensely curious. Who was the buyer? I asked. Marcus smiled, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. That is the truly beautiful part, Audrey. Elias hacked into Kendrick's corporate communications. For the past 3 months, Kendrick has been aggressively courting a massive institutional client, trying to secure them for his hedge fund to stop the bleeding from his unauthorized crypto losses. He promised this client that he could quietly secure 300 acres of prime Texas real estate for their new manufacturing plant. He guaranteed them he could get the land for a fraction of its market value because he had an inside track with the current financially desperate owner. I felt the pieces clicking together in my mind, forming a picture of unparalleled arrogance and stupidity. Who is the client? Marcus. Apex Semiconductors? Marcus replied, saying the name like a drop of heavy gold. The silence in my office was deafening. Apex Semiconductors. The exact same multinational tech conglomerate that had already paid me $45 million for my farm. The same company that had forced me to sign a watertight non-disclosure agreement while they finalized their city council zoning permits. I began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and quickly grew into full, uncontainable laughter. Kendrick was not just a thief, he was a complete fool. He was desperately trying to broker the sale of my land to Apex Semiconductors to earn a massive broker fee and save his failing hedge fund. He had no idea that Apex had already bypassed him, approached me directly, and purchased the property outright weeks ago. He was trying to sell a multi-million-dollar asset to the exact company that already held the deed. Kendrick was promising Apex Semiconductors land they already owned, using me as his supposed leverage. The sheer perfection of the situation was completely breathtaking. I looked down at my mother's cruel note and smiled. I had been given a clear choice. Marcus, I said softly, please buy a first-class ticket to Connecticut. We are going to permanently ruin a very expensive, very arrogant party. The tires of my rented sedan crunched against the pristine gravel of the Oakwood Country Club driveway. Valets in crisp white shirts rushed to open the doors of imported luxury vehicles, ushering Connecticut's elite into my parents' 40th anniversary gala. I stepped out of my car, ignoring the valet's confused glance at my modest rental, and walked toward the grand entrance. My mother had explicitly demanded I arrive through the service kitchen at 3 o'clock to don a cater-waiter uniform. Instead, I strolled through the main mahogany double doors at 7 o'clock sharp. I wore a completely unadorned, simple black sheath dress. It lacked the ostentatious sequins, heavy lace, and designer logos that my family equated with success, but the silk was cut with absolute precision. I carried a sleek clutch containing the deed transfer paperwork and a certified copy of my $45 million wire transfer receipt. The grand ballroom was a monument to my parents' obsession with status. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over 50 circular tables draped in heavy gold linen. Waiters carried silver trays loaded with caviar and champagne. I bypassed the greeting line and stepped directly into the crowd. The reaction was immediate. Aunt Lucille, wearing a diamond necklace that looked heavy enough to cause spinal damage, nudged her husband and pointed openly at me. My cousin Greg, clutching a crystal tumbler of scotch, let his eyes rake over my plain dress before turning away with a scoff. I could hear the whispers rippling outward from my position. They all knew the narrative. They all believed I was the destitute, unstable failure who had lost her job, lost her husband, and lost her mind. I walked straight past their sneering faces, feeling absolutely nothing but an icy, exhilarating calm. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and positioned myself near the lavish seafood buffet, giving me a perfect vantage point of the entire room. Across the ballroom, my mother Patricia stood frozen, her eyes locking onto me. Her carefully lifted face turned pale beneath her heavy makeup. She saw my black dress. She saw that I was not carrying a tray of appetizers. I raised my sparkling water toward her in a silent, mocking toast. She took a furious step in my direction, but her wealthy friends quickly surrounded her, demanding her attention and forcing her to maintain her gracious hostess facade. She was trapped by her own desperate need for public perfection. My attention shifted to the center of the room where Kendrick had successfully turned my parents' anniversary gala into his own personal networking event. He stood near the ice sculpture, surrounded by a tight circle of my father's most affluent golf buddies and several prominent local investors. Kendrick held a glass of expensive bourbon, his face flushed with arrogance and alcohol. His voice carried effortlessly over the soft string quartet playing in the background. "I am telling you, the market is completely soft if you lack the right connections," Kendrick boasted loudly, gesturing with his free hand. "But if you have the insider track, the opportunities are absolutely staggering." I just locked down the crowning achievement of my career this morning. We are talking about a massive corporate expansion in Austin, Texas. The older men in the circle leaned in their greed, easily mirroring his own. Richard, my father, stood beside Kendrick, practically glowing with pride. This was the son-in-law he had always wanted, the ruthless closer who understood how the real world operated. "It is a prime plot of industrial land right over a lithium deposit," Kendrick continued, soaking up the admiration. "The current owner is completely clueless, just a desperate, financially illiterate woman drowning in back taxes. She has zero idea what the land is actually worth. I am stepping in to broker the sale to a major semiconductor conglomerate. They need the site for a new manufacturing plant, and I am handing it to them on a silver platter. My commission alone on this single transaction will clear $4 million. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. The flavor of the lime wedge was sharp and refreshing. Kendrick was radiating pure, unchecked euphoria. He was selling the illusion of his own brilliance to men who could fund his failing hedge fund using my land as the ultimate bait. "Who is the buyer?" Kendrick, one of the investors, asked, leaning closer. "That sounds like a game-changing deal." "Apex Semiconductors," Kendrick stated, puffing out his chest. "I have been courting their executive board for months. They are highly secretive, protecting the identity of the anonymous seller they are dealing with, so the local market does not completely explode. But my firm has the exclusive inside track. We finalize the paperwork tonight and the $4 million broker fee hits my account by Monday morning. It is the easiest money I have ever made in my entire life." The men chuckled, slapping Kendrick on the back and offering congratulations. My father raised his glass, offering a toast to his brilliant son-in-law. I stood silently by the buffet, watching the spectacle unfold. Kendrick was oblivious to the fact that the anonymous seller Apex was protecting stood 40 feet away. He did not know Apex had bypassed his floundering hedge fund, approached me directly through a specialized legal team, and wired $45 million into my private accounts weeks ago. He was boasting about a $4 million commission on a deal that had already closed without him. Kendrick was actively trying to sell a multi-million-dollar asset to a company that already possessed the deed, and he was using his own father-in-law's party to brag about his impending felony fraud. He was digging a hole so deep he'd never see daylight. I took a sip of water, checking my watch. Dessert service was an hour away. The countdown to destruction had officially begun. I watched the ice melting off the intricately carved swan centerpiece, my sparkling water warming in my hand. Kendrick was still holding court, his booming voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as he elaborated on the brilliance of his imminent $4 million commission. He detailed how easily he had maneuvered the anonymous desperate seller into a corner. His audience of affluent investors chuckled, swirling their amber liquors, entirely captivated by his absolute fiction. I took another slow, refreshing sip of my water, my eyes tracking the reflection of my parents in the mirrored wall behind the buffet. Patricia had finally managed to extricate herself from her circle of admirers. Her face was a rigid mask of fury, the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone glittering sharply under the crystal chandeliers. Richard flanked her, his jaw tightly clenched, his eyes locked onto my plain black sheath dress. They marched across the polished hardwood floor with identical predatory strides. They expected a broken, humiliated cater waiter carrying a tray of crab puffs. Instead, they found a silent observer, refusing to play their assigned game. I placed my glass on a passing silver tray and turned to face them. Richard reached me first. His thick fingers clamped around my upper arm like a vice digging painfully into my skin. He did not utter a single greeting. He simply leaned in close, his breath smelling heavily of expensive scotch and aged cigars. "You are going to make a spectacle of yourself," he hissed, his voice a low, vibrating growl, designed to avoid drawing immediate attention from the nearby tables. "You were given explicit instructions for tonight, Audrey." Patricia materialized on my other side, her manicured nails digging into my opposite forearm. Her voice was pure venom, a sharp whisper meant only for me. "Where is your uniform, you ungrateful wretch? You come into my anniversary gala looking like a common street beggar refusing to earn your keep. We gave you a chance to redeem your pathetic life and you spit in our faces." I did not struggle against their grip. I simply allowed them to propel me forward, my expression completely blank. They marched me away from the safety of the buffet, dragging me directly toward the very center of the grand ballroom. The string quartet had just concluded a classical piece, leaving a sudden echoing lull in the ambient noise. My parents stopped precisely under the largest, most luminous chandelier, forcing me to stand exactly where every single guest could see us. Kendrick noticed the commotion and immediately paused his boasting, stepping away from the investors with Brittany trailing closely behind him. They formed a tight, suffocating circle around me. The surrounding guests naturally quieted down, turning their heads to watch the drama unfold. Hundreds of eyes bored into my simple black dress, judging my lack of formal attire, whispering behind raised champagne flutes. Richard released my arm and stepped back, puffing out his chest to project maximum authority. "You have humiliated this family for the absolute last time," Richard announced, pitching his voice so the nearest 3 rows of tables could hear every single word clearly. "We offered you a generous lifeline when you were fired, divorced, and completely destitute. We offered to buy that barren wasteland in Texas to save you from your own staggering incompetence." Brittany crossed her arms, shooting me a look of pure concentrated superiority. "You are so stubborn and selfish," Audrey Brittany chimed in, perfectly playing the role of the victimized charitable sister. Kendrick put his entire professional reputation and career on the line to secure $50,000 just to keep you off the streets, and you have the absolute ungrateful audacity to hold up the final paperwork out of sheer spite and malicious intent. Patricia took a step forward, closing the distance between us until I could see the furious, pulsing vein in her neck. "You will fix this right now," Patricia commanded, her voice ringing out into the silent ballroom. "You will get down on your knees right here on this floor, and you will apologize to your sister and your brother-in-law for your incredible selfishness. You will beg them for their charity. If you refuse, we will have the security guards drag you out into the freezing rain tonight." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of elite guests. Demanding a grown woman kneel in the middle of a formal gala was a level of public degradation that even my parents had never previously attempted. They wanted me shattered. They needed to witness my total subjugation before they forced a pen into my hand. I looked directly into his eyes, bypassing my mother entirely. My gaze was steady cold and entirely devoid of fear. "I will never kneel for you," I stated, my voice echoing clearly across the hushed room. "And I will certainly never apologize to a man who is actively trying to commit federal fraud." The words had barely left my mouth when Patricia completely lost her mind. Her hand lashed out with terrifying speed. The sharp, concussive crack of her palm striking my cheek sounded like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side, a hot, stinging pain blooming instantly across my skin. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. I slowly turned my face back to her, refusing to raise a hand to soothe the stinging welt. Patricia was shaking with rage, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are absolutely dead to us," she screamed, abandoning all pretense of high society manners. "You are a societal failure, Audrey. You will never amount to anything, and you will die completely alone in the gutter." I stood perfectly still, letting her cement her cruelty in front of every witness in the room. The silence that followed her outburst was heavy, thick with absolute shock. I calmly reached into my sleek evening clutch. My moment of total absolute reckoning had finally arrived for all of them tonight. My hand slipped into the cool interior of my evening clutch, bypassing the folded property deed and the bank transfer receipt. Instead, I pulled out a crisp white silk handkerchief. I did not bring the fabric to my eyes because there were no tears to dry. My vision was perfectly clear, maintaining terrifying eye contact with my mother. I raised the silk square to my stinging cheek and deliberately wiped away a tiny smudge of her heavy foundation. I folded the handkerchief, placed it back into my clutch, and snapped the metallic clasp shut. The sharp click echoed across the silent ballroom. I did not utter a single word of defense or retaliation. I simply turned my back on the entire room and began walking toward the grand mahogany exit doors. I had made it exactly 4 steps before Kendrick lunged. His heavy footsteps pounded against the polished hardwood floor right behind me. A second later, his thick fingers clamped down brutally on my left arm, jerking me to a sudden halt. He yanked me backward, leaning in so closely that I could feel the heat radiating from his flushed skin. The overwhelming stench of top-shelf bourbon and stale cigar smoke washed over my face. He angled his body to shield us from the direct view of the horrified guests, turning his public outrage into a deeply intimate, vicious assault. "You think you can just walk away from this?" Kendrick hissed, his voice dropping to a guttural, venomous whisper right beside my ear. "You think you have won something here tonight, Audrey. You are completely delusional. I know exactly how to deal with stubborn, uneducated dirt farmers like you. You want to hold on to that useless patch of dust in Texas. Fine, keep it, but you need to understand exactly who you are messing with." I stared straight ahead at the ballroom doors, refusing to turn my head or acknowledge his physical grip. "I have friends in the local Austin municipal government." Kendrick growled, his fingernails digging deeper into my arm. "I have golfed with the county commissioners, and I have funded their re-election campaigns. I am going to make one phone call on Monday morning, and they are going to tie your land up in eminent domain disputes so fast your head will spin. I will drown you in endless environmental reviews, zoning violations, and municipal litigation. I will ensure you spend every single penny you have left trying to fight the city in court. You're going to lose it all, and I'll buy it for pennies. Go cry in your dirt." He released my arm with a violent shove, expecting me to stumble. I kept my footing perfectly. I did not look back. I simply resumed my steady, measured pace. I walked out into the cool night air. The valet brought my car around, looking at my reddened cheek. I offered him a polite smile, handed him a generous tip, and drove away from the country club. My cheek burned intensely, a steady pulsing throb that served as a physical reminder of their absolute moral bankruptcy. Yet beneath the pain, my mind was sharper and clearer than it had been in my entire life. They had played their final hand, utilizing every ounce of cruelty and manipulation they possessed. Now it was my turn to drop the anvil. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the large windows of my rented suite, casting a bright golden glow across the room. I woke up feeling completely refreshed. I brewed coffee, sat at the table, and opened my laptop. I ignored my parents' frantic messages. I simply reviewed my financial dashboard, admiring the $45 million balance sitting securely in my private accounts. It represented total, absolute, and unassailable freedom for my future. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, my new cell phone suddenly began to ring. The caller ID displayed a private, completely unlisted number, but I knew exactly who it was. I calmly swiped the glowing screen and brought the phone directly to my waiting ear. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson," a smooth, highly professional voice greeted me. "This is Marcus Vance, Vice President of Acquisitions at Apex Semiconductors. I apologize for calling so early on a Sunday, but we have a rather amusing situation developing on our end, and my legal team advised me to consult with you directly before we take any further action." "Good morning, Marcus," I replied, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my coffee while watching a flock of birds soar past the glass. "What exactly seems to be the unprecedented problem on your end today?" "Well," Marcus chuckled, a low, rich sound of genuine amusement. "Beginning at exactly 8 o'clock this morning, our executive switchboard has been completely flooded with frantic calls from an asset manager at a mid-tier hedge fund, a man named Kendrick. He is demanding to speak directly with our CEO. He claims he has exclusive binding representation rights for the uneducated owner of the Austin plot we have been looking at. He is aggressively offering to broker a quiet sale to us for $10 million, claiming the owner is desperate for cash and completely unaware of the market value." I leaned back in my highly comfortable chair, looking quietly out at the beautiful city skyline directly through the glass. "And what exactly did you ultimately decide to tell him, Marcus?" "We have not told him anything yet," Marcus replied. "Our legal department finds his aggressive persistence highly entertaining, considering we already hold the clear, uncontested deed to the land and wired you $45 million last month. He is practically screaming at our receptionist, demanding a finder fee for a property we already own. It borders on severe wire fraud and corporate harassment. So, Ms. Wilson, as our esteemed seller and newest major shareholder, I am calling to ask a simple question. How would you like us to handle this pathetic little pest?" I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Marcus Vance was a shark, yet I could hear the genuine anticipation in his voice. He was a man who appreciated a perfectly executed corporate trap, and I was about to hand him a masterpiece. "Do not block his calls, Marcus," I instructed, my voice measured. "In fact, I want you to roll out the red carpet. Put him through to your senior acquisitions team. Tell him that Apex Semiconductors is highly interested in his proposal. Stroke his ego. Tell him your board of directors is absolutely thrilled that a broker of his immense caliber brought this unique opportunity to your attention." I can practically hear his chest inflating from here. Marcus chuckled. "We will tell him his local market insights are invaluable. What is the ultimate play here, Miss Wilson?" "The play is total exposure," I replied. "Tell him the anonymous seller has officially agreed to his representation for this specific land transfer. Tell him we are moving forward with the $10 million acquisition and his $4 million commission is approved. But there is a catch. Tell him this anonymous seller is incredibly eccentric and highly traditional. She requires a formal in-person commission signing at your main corporate headquarters to finalize the transfer of the deed." "An in-person signing for a blind brokerage deal," Marcus mused. "It is a bit unorthodox, but men like Kendrick never question a sudden windfall. He will run right through any red flags if he thinks a $4 million check is waiting on the other side of the door." "Exactly," I agreed. "And Marcus, there is one final critical stipulation. Tell him this new corporate partnership is so monumentally important to Apex Semiconductors that we want to host a celebratory champagne reception immediately following the signing. Insist that he brings his wife and his entire family to celebrate. Tell him our executive board wants to meet the family of the visionary broker who made this historic acquisition possible." Marcus let out a low whistle of appreciation. "You want his entire audience present when the floor drops out from under him. You are inviting his family to witness his corporate execution. I will have our legal department draft a dummy commission agreement. It will look entirely legitimate. I will have my team contact him before noon. We will set the trap exactly as you have requested. I ended the call and set my phone down on the marble counter. The bait was officially in the water. Kendrick was a desperate, cornered animal. The federal auditors were already circling his failing hedge fund, scrutinizing his unauthorized crypto losses. He needed capital immediately to cover his tracks and avoid federal prison. In his mind, this $4 million commission was not just a victory. It was his ultimate salvation. He would not stop to analyze why a multinational conglomerate was suddenly bending over backward to accommodate him. His towering arrogance would completely blind him to the truth. Less than 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was not from Marcus. It was from the family group chat that I had muted months ago. I tapped the screen and watched the messages flood in a relentless tide of gloating and unearned triumph. Brittany was the first to strike. Kendrick just officially secured a $10 million land acquisition deal with Apex Semiconductors. The executive board personally requested him. They are flying us all out to their corporate headquarters on Wednesday for a private signing ceremony and a champagne reception. We are going to be celebrating his $4 million commission while you are likely facing eviction. You really played your cards wrong, Audrey. A minute later, a message from my father appeared. This is what true business acumen looks like. Kendrick is a mastermind. He maneuvered a clueless seller into handing him the deal of a decade. He just secured the financial future of our entire family. You had your chance to be part of this circle, Audrey. You chose to be a stubborn, ungrateful failure instead. Do not ever ask us for a dime. I read the messages twice, letting their sheer delusion wash over me. Kendrick had swallowed the bait whole. Apex had contacted him, confirmed the imaginary meeting, and fed him the exact narrative I had scripted. Kendrick was ecstatic. He truly believed he had just outsmarted an anonymous seller, secured a life-changing fortune, and saved his fraudulent hedge fund from imminent collapse. He was parading around my parents' house right now, completely unaware that he was bragging about stealing my property. He was so blinded by greed that he had not even bothered to run a basic title search on the land he was supposedly brokering. If he had done the bare minimum due diligence, he would have discovered that the deed had already been legally transferred to Apex Semiconductors weeks ago. But Kendrick was not a meticulous businessman. He was a reckless gambler who relied on bluster and manipulation to survive. I walked to the closet and pulled out the garment bag containing my wardrobe for the week. I selected a razor-sharp tailored charcoal pantsuit and a pair of pristine black stilettos. My parents and sister were expecting to walk into a lavish corporate boardroom to sip expensive champagne and toast to Kendrick's unparalleled brilliance. They were expecting to rub elbows with executives and cement their status as local royalty. Instead, they were going to walk into a locked room and find the uneducated, desperate seller sitting at the head of the mahogany table. They were going to watch Kendrick attempt to sell a property to the exact company that already owned it. They were going to witness his massive financial crimes laid bare in front of a team of ruthless corporate attorneys. The trap was perfectly set, the bait was taken, and the countdown to Wednesday morning had officially begun. The euphoria radiating from my family over the next 48 hours was nothing short of a manic drug-induced high. Kendrick had hung up the phone with the Apex Semiconductors acquisitions team and immediately declared himself the undisputed king of Connecticut real estate. In his mind, the $4 million commission was no longer a hypothetical possibility. It was cold, hard cash already sitting comfortably in his bank account. He completely ignored the fundamental reality that he did not possess a signed contract, he did not represent the seller, and he had not actually brokered a single legitimate transaction. He was running entirely on the fumes of his own colossal arrogance and the validation of a corporate secretary who had simply followed my precise instructions to stroke his ego. Brittany, equally infected by this sudden illusion of staggering wealth, wasted absolutely no time translating imaginary money into highly visible debt. By Monday afternoon, my phone was relentlessly buzzing with notifications from her public Instagram feed. I sat at my sleek glass desk, sipping a cup of herbal tea, and watched my sister document her financial suicide in real time. The first video story showed Brittany strutting into an exclusive imported auto dealership in Greenwich, loudly announcing to a flock of eager salesmen that her husband had just closed a $10 million tech acquisition. 2 hours later, a new photo appeared. Brittany was draped seductively over the hood of a brand new custom-ordered Porsche 911. The caption read, "When your husband is a literal genius, you get the toys you deserve. Next stop, the Hamptons." I zoomed in on the glossy photograph, noting the temporary dealer plates. I knew Kendrick's actual financial reality. His hedge fund was actively hemorrhaging capital, and federal auditors were breathing down his neck. He possessed absolutely no liquid cash to purchase a $150,000 sports car outright. He had financed the entire vehicle using a predatory high-interest bridge loan entirely collateralized by the promise of his impending Wednesday commission. He was leveraging phantom money at exorbitant interest rates just to maintain the aesthetic of a wildly successful broker. But a luxury car was merely the appetizer for Brittany's unhinged spending spree. She craved permanent, undeniable status. By Tuesday morning, Brittany had escalated her delusions to the real estate market. For years, she had bitterly complained about renting summer cottages, while her wealthy country club peers owned sprawling seasonal estates. The imaginary $4 million windfall was her immediate ticket into the upper echelons of East Coast society. She found an immaculate cedar-shingled summer house in East Hampton listed for $3 million. In a desperate, frantic bid to secure the property before the summer rush, she signed an aggressive contract requiring an immediate, non-refundable cash deposit of $100,000. She documented the entire signing process on social media, posing with the high-end real estate broker and holding up a champagne flute. The caption proudly declared that the Blackwell family had officially secured their summer sanctuary. The sheer mechanics of how Kendrick and Brittany funded that non-refundable deposit were a testament to my parents' breathtaking gullibility. Kendrick's credit was secretly in ruins, making it mathematically impossible for him to secure a short-term personal loan of that magnitude without massive collateral. He needed financially stable guarantors to underwrite his manic spending until the Apex check supposedly cleared. Enter Richard and Patricia. Blinded by the glittering promise of Kendrick's wealth and desperate to showcase their successful son-in-law to their judgmental social circle, my parents eagerly stepped into the financial trap. They co-signed the exorbitant auto loan for the Porsche. They leveraged their own pristine credit and drained a massive portion of their liquid retirement savings to front the $100,000 Hamptons deposit. They did not view this as a risk. They viewed it as a temporary, entirely safe bridge loan to a man who was about to deposit $4 million into his corporate account. Richard spent his entire Tuesday afternoon holding court in the men's grill at the Oakwood Country Club, buying rounds of top-shelf scotch for his associates. He loudly bragged about Kendrick's brilliant maneuver, boasting that his son-in-law was such a heavy hitter that multinational conglomerates were begging for his exclusive representation. Patricia was equally insufferable, cornering her fellow socialites in the club's dining room to show off Brittany's Instagram photos. She made sure everyone knew that her family was ascending to an entirely new bracket of wealth, explicitly contrasting Brittany's fabulous new lifestyle with my own supposed destitution. They were wrapping the rope around their own necks and pulling it tight, completely intoxicated by their own vanity. I monitored every single development with clinical detached fascination. Every Instagram post, every boasted claim, every newly signed debt obligation was another nail in their collective coffin. They were gleefully spending money they did not have, based on a deal that did not exist, brokered with a company that was actively preparing to destroy them. The contrast between their chaotic, frantic consumption and my silent, absolute financial security was profoundly satisfying. I did not need to lift a finger to ruin them. I simply needed to let their own greed consume them from the inside out. They believed they had permanently discarded me, the societal failure, who refused to kneel at their feet. They thought Wednesday morning would be the crowning coronation of their family dynasty. They were utterly convinced that their brilliant machinations had finally secured their ultimate victory, leaving me entirely powerless and broken in the dust. As I packed my briefcase for the flight to the Apex Semiconductor's headquarters, I reviewed the meticulously drafted documents my legal team had prepared. I zipped the leather case shut, feeling a cold, calm anticipation settling deeply into my bones. The trap was fully loaded, the bait had been devoured, and the execution was officially set. My phone vibrated against the polished granite of the hotel's suite counter. I glanced down at the illuminated screen. It was 9 o'clock on Tuesday night, the eve of the trap springing shut. The notification displayed a message from my mother, Patricia. I swiped open the text, reading the words twice just to fully absorb the sheer magnitude of her venom. "We are flying to the city tomorrow to finalize Kendrick's multi-million-dollar deal," the message read. "We are officially wealthy beyond your comprehension. I hope you enjoy your miserable, dirty life." I did not type a response. I did not feel the familiar sting of rejection that would have crippled me a year ago. Instead, I felt an icy, resolute calm. I locked my phone and slid it into my briefcase. I was already in the city, occupying a sprawling penthouse suite, situated exactly 4 blocks away from the Apex Semiconductor's corporate tower. I was not alone. Spread out across the massive dining table were stacks of financial records, bank transfer confirmations, and legally binding property deeds. Sitting across from me was my lead corporate attorney, David Thorne, alongside 2 specialists from his white-collar fraud division. Marcus Vance had joined us via a secure video conference link, his face projected on the large flat-screen monitor at the end of the table. "We have finalized the SEC reporting documents," David announced, sliding a thick leather-bound folder toward me. "Everything is perfectly aligned. Kendrick's attempt to broker a property he does not represent, combined with his demand for a $4 million commission on an asset already wholly owned by a publicly traded company, constitutes textbook wire fraud. The moment he signs that dummy commission agreement tomorrow morning, he is officially committing a federal crime on corporate property." Marcus nodded from the screen, his expression predatory. "Our internal security team is fully briefed. We have cameras recording every angle of that boardroom. The local authorities have been notified of a potential corporate fraud incident in progress. They are standing by. All we need is for your esteemed brother-in-law to put his signature on the dotted line." I reviewed the final page of the SEC disclosure, verifying that Kendrick's failing hedge fund and his unauthorized crypto losses were thoroughly documented. The level of detail was staggering. He had left a paper trail of financial ruin a mile wide, and he was about to walk blindly into a room designed to expose every single lie he had ever told. "I appreciate the meticulous work, gentlemen," I said, closing the folder and sliding it back to David. "Tomorrow morning we give them exactly what they asked for. We give them the audience they crave." I stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline. The reflection staring back at me was a woman who had completely shed the skin of the obedient, invisible daughter. The family that had mocked my ambition, belittled my career, and cheered for my downfall was currently sleeping in a luxury hotel down the street, entirely funded by high-interest debt they could never repay. They believed they were waking up to a coronation. They were waking up to an execution. The next morning, sunlight poured through the wrap-around glass walls of the Apex Semiconductor's executive boardroom. The space was a monument to corporate power perched on the 50th floor, with breathtaking, unobstructed views of the city. At the center of the room sat a massive, polished mahogany table surrounded by plush leather ergonomic chairs. Kendrick sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who had already conquered the world. He wore a brand-new bespoke Italian suit that he had undoubtedly purchased on credit just for this occasion. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a cup of imported espresso, projecting an aura of untouchable arrogance. Beside him, Brittany was busy adjusting her posture for a selfie, ensuring the gleaming corporate logo on the frosted glass wall behind them was perfectly centered in the frame. She wore a designer dress that screamed new money and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the morning light. She typed a caption about closing 8-figure deals before breakfast, hitting send with a triumphant smirk. My parents, Richard and Patricia, occupied the adjacent seats, looking incredibly smug. Richard was inspecting the expensive espresso cup, nodding in approval at the quality of the corporate hospitality. Patricia was smoothing her skirt, her chin tilted upward, practically vibrating with elitist satisfaction. "Can you believe the sheer incompetence of this seller?" Kendrick chuckled, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous boardroom. "She is sitting on a $10 million gold mine, and she hands it to me for a simple finder fee. These rural dirt farmers have absolutely no concept of market value. It is almost too easy taking their money." Richard nodded enthusiastically, taking a sip of his coffee. "You have to strike when people are desperate, Kendrick. That is the fundamental rule of business. She probably needs the cash to pay off a tractor or fix a barn. You're practically doing her a favor by taking it off her hands." And to think, Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with venomous condescension, to think that Audrey actually tried to claim she was building something significant. She is probably scrubbing floors right now while we are sitting in the epicenter of global commerce. This is what true success looks like. This is what a real family legacy is built upon. Brittany set her phone face down on the table, her eyes gleaming with greed. "I wonder what this eccentric seller will even look like. Probably some unwashed, terrified woman in flannel who has never seen the inside of a building taller than 2 stories. I almost feel bad for her. Almost." Kendrick checked his heavy gold watch, drumming his fingers impatiently. "Where are they hiding?" The heavy mahogany doors swung wide with a slow, deliberate weight that commanded the immediate attention of everyone seated at the table. The low murmur of arrogant conversation abruptly died. I stepped over the threshold and into the sunlit expanse of the executive boardroom. I was not wearing flannel. I was not cowering. I was wearing a bespoke $5,000 charcoal Tom Ford suit that cut a razor-sharp silhouette against the frosted glass of the corridor behind me. The fabric moved with a fluid, predatory grace as I walked, my black stilettos striking the polished hardwood floor with the rhythmic, unyielding cadence of a ticking clock. My posture was absolute, my chin held high and my expression completely devoid of whatever submissive warmth they had expected to find. I did not come alone. Flanking my right side was Marcus Vance, Vice President of Acquisitions, his face a mask of supreme corporate authority. To my left stood the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Semiconductors, Jonathan Sterling, a man whose mere presence shifted global markets. Trailing just a half step behind us were 3 of the most intimidating corporate litigators in the country. They wore identical expressions of clinical detachment, carrying thick leather briefcases that looked less like legal files and more like weapons of mass financial destruction. We moved as a single impenetrable unit, a unified front of absolute power entering a room occupied by amateurs. The physical reaction from my family was a masterpiece of staggered comprehension. My mother, Patricia, froze with her espresso cup halfway to her lips, her eyes widening so drastically I thought they might shatter. Richard dropped his hands to the table, his jaw slacking as he tried to process the impossible image before him. Brittany blinked rapidly, her manicured fingers pausing over her phone screen, her brain violently rejecting the visual data it was receiving. She looked at my pristine suit, then down at her own flashy designer dress, a sudden sharp flash of inadequacy crossing her features. Kendrick was the first to break the suffocating silence. His initial shock quickly morphed into a frantic, desperate need to maintain his perceived dominance in the room. He let out a loud, entirely unnatural burst of laughter that echoed awkwardly against the glass walls. He pushed himself up from his leather chair, running a hand over his tie in a gesture of false bravado. "Well, this is certainly a bizarre coincidence," Kendrick announced, his voice carrying a nervous, vibrating edge. He gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of his hand, refusing to acknowledge the heavy hitters standing at my side. "Audrey, you must have taken a wrong turn on the elevator. The service corridor is located on the other side of the building. Are you catering this meeting today? Because if you are, we prefer sparkling water with our champagne, not whatever tap water you usually serve." My mother immediately seized upon his lifeline of delusion, her chest puffing out as she regained her elitist footing. "Really, Audrey, Patricia scolded, her tone dripping with venomous embarrassment. You are interrupting a highly sensitive multi-million-dollar corporate transaction. Your brother-in-law is conducting vital business here. It is wildly inappropriate for you to be wandering the executive floors. Please leave immediately before security is called to escort you out. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single word of defense or explanation. I simply maintained my terrifying, unblinking eye contact with Kendrick, letting the deafening silence stretch until it became physically agonizing. I watched the confident smirk on his face begin to tremble at the edges. I watched the beads of sweat form along his hairline as his primitive survival instincts finally began to warn him that something was catastrophically wrong. He looked at the three corporate litigators, noting their cold, predatory stares, and his Adam's apple bobbed wildly as he swallowed hard. He turned toward Jonathan Sterling, attempting to extend his hand in a gesture of panicked camaraderie. "Mr. Sterling, it is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person." Kendrick stammered, his voice losing all its previous boom. "I am Kendrick, the broker you requested. I apologize for the interruption from my sister-in-law. She has a history of erratic behavior and clearly lacks a basic understanding of corporate boundaries. If we could just proceed with the commission signing." Jonathan Sterling did not accept the outstretched hand. He did not even acknowledge Kendrick's physical existence. He treated the sweating, desperate man like an unpleasant stain on his boardroom table. Instead, the chief executive officer of a global technology empire turned his back entirely on my family. He stepped directly in front of me, his expression softening into a look of profound, genuine respect. He extended his right hand. I met his grip, our handshake firm, resolute, and devastatingly final. "Audrey, thank you again for the seamless transfer of the 300 acres," Jonathan said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room, ensuring every single syllable struck its intended target. "Your vision for sustainable land use is absolutely brilliant, and it is exactly why we were happy to pay the $45 million. Welcome to the Apex family. We are thrilled to have you as our newest major shareholder." The air was instantly sucked out of the room. The color violently drained from Kendrick's face, leaving him a ghastly, sickly shade of gray. The phantom $4 million commission he had already spent evaporated into thin air, replaced by the crushing, inescapable weight of federal fraud and financial ruin. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her throat as the sheer magnitude of the $45 million figure registered in her brain. Brittany's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the mahogany table. The execution was flawless, a perfectly orchestrated dismantling of their towering arrogance, leaving them to face the incredibly brutal, unforgiving reality of their absolute and total defeat. $45 million. The words echoed off the frosted glass walls of the executive boardroom, ringing with the finality of a judge reading a death sentence. The syllables hung suspended in the chilled, climate-controlled air, heavy and suffocating. The color entirely drained from Kendrick's face, leaving behind a sickly, translucent gray that made him look suddenly ancient. The smug, untouchable veneer he had worn just seconds prior shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, like a fish pulled onto dry land. Beside him, Brittany let out a sharp, involuntary squeak. The leather presentation portfolio she had brought to hold their imaginary contracts slipped from her trembling hands. It hit the edge of the mahogany table before crashing to the floor, spilling blank papers and promotional brochures across the polished hardwood in a chaotic, messy slide. Richard let out a wheezing cough, his hand flying up to violently clutch his chest. He gripped the lapel of his suit, his knuckles turning white as his breathing grew shallow and erratic. He staggered backward, knocking into Patricia. My mother let out a loud, theatrical gasp, her knees completely buckling beneath her. She stumbled backward, her arms flailing wildly before she collapsed heavily into one of the plush leather chairs. She sat there panting, staring at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes, trying desperately to pull oxygen into her suddenly restricted lungs. The absolute silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of Brittany's frantic, shallow hyperventilating. I did not break eye contact with Kendrick. Moving with deliberate, unhurried precision, I walked the length of the massive boardroom table. The three corporate litigators stepped seamlessly out of my path, fanning out along the glass walls like highly paid sentinels securing a perimeter. Jonathan Sterling and Marcus Vance watched with clinical fascination as I bypassed the standard seating and moved directly toward the head of the room. I reached the leather chairman's seat, the exact chair Kendrick had been eyeing since he walked in, and I sat down. I smoothed the fabric of my suit, placed my hands flat on the cool mahogany surface, and looked at Kendrick with a lethal, absolute calm. "I hear you have been claiming to represent the dumb owner of the Austin property," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, letting the words slice through the silence like a scalpel. "That is fascinating, Kendrick. Truly. I am incredibly curious to know how exactly you plan to broker the sale of a 300-acre parcel that I already sold to Apex Semiconductors over a month ago." Kendrick stared at me, his eyes bulging. His brain was violently misfiring, unable to reconcile the impoverished, uneducated sister-in-law he had ruthlessly mocked with the major corporate shareholder currently sitting at the head of the table. He looked frantically at Jonathan Sterling, seeking some kind of correction, some assurance that this was an elaborate prank. "Mr. Sterling." Kendrick stammered, his voice cracking, horribly reduced to a desperate, reedy whine. "This is insane. There is a massive misunderstanding here. She is lying. Audrey does not own any land in Texas. She is practically destitute. I have the brokerage agreement right here. We have an established deal for $10 million. Jonathan Sterling looked at Kendrick with profound disgust. "Mr. Vance," the CEO said, not bothering to address Kendrick directly, "please enlighten our guest regarding his legal standing in this building." Marcus stepped forward, placing a thick stack of printed documents onto the table. "There is no deal," Kendrick Marcus stated coldly. "Apex Semiconductors holds the exclusive recorded deed to the Austin parcel purchased directly from Audrey Wilson for $45 million. We wired her the funds directly. What you hold is a dummy contract drafted by our legal team to document your aggressive attempts to commit felony wire fraud on our corporate property." Kendrick stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the table. He looked at the documents, then at me, then at the litigators. He was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving under his tight, expensive suit. "No," Kendrick gasped, shaking his head frantically. "No, that is impossible. You cannot do this. We signed a contract. I have commitments. I have investments based on this commission. You have high-interest debt based on a delusion," I corrected him, my voice devoid of any pity. "You bought a Porsche on a bridge loan you cannot afford. You put a $100,000 non-refundable cash deposit on a summer house in the Hamptons. You leveraged phantom money because your ego could not tolerate doing basic foundational due diligence. If you had simply checked the county property records, you would have seen my name on the original deed. But you were too busy bragging at the country club to read a single legal document." Brittany let out a loud, piercing sob. She looked at her husband, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated panic. "Kendrick," she shrieked, her voice echoing painfully off the glass walls. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me we have the money. We already signed the paperwork for the house. We owe them." Kendrick could not answer her. He was staring at the floor, his breathing ragged, his entire world collapsing around him in real time. Richard, still clutching his chest, finally found his voice. His face was purple with rage and terror. "Audrey, what have you done?" he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "We co-signed those loans. We put up our retirement accounts to guarantee that Hampton's deposit. You set us up to be ruined." "I did not set you up, Richard," I replied, my gaze shifting to my parents. "You ruined yourselves. You eagerly financed a fraudulent lifestyle because you wanted to show off to your social circle. You actively chose to bankroll a man who was openly stealing. I am simply stepping aside to let you enjoy the immense wealth Kendrick secured for you." Kendrick dragged a trembling hand down his face, smearing a sheen of cold sweat across his cheek. He looked like a man awaiting the hangman. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the mahogany table, and decided it was time to pull the lever. "You thought you had discovered a gold mine, Kendrick?" I began, my voice carrying the steady, resonant acoustic of absolute certainty. You thought you could swoop in, play the high-rolling dealmaker, and collect a $4 million finder fee for a property you had absolutely no legal right to touch. But your arrogance blinded you to the most basic timeline of events. I did not just sell that land to Apex Semiconductors. I finalized the transfer and secured the $45 million payout exactly 4 days before Thanksgiving. The date hung in the air, landing like a physical blow. Brittany let out a sharp gasp, her tear-streaked face whipping toward me. 4 days before Thanksgiving, she repeated, her voice a hollow, fragile squeak. But you sat at the dinner table. You let us talk about the country club and the new car. You let Dad offer you a clerical job. I smiled, feeling no warmth, only the cold precision of justice. I let you speak your truth, Brittany. I let you demonstrate exactly who you all are when you believe you hold the power. While you were mocking my career and offering me your leftover scraps, the ink was already dry on a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition. But let us return to your brilliant husband. I shifted my gaze back to Kendrick. He was shrinking into his expensive suit, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy double doors. You did not just stumble into this Apex deal by accident, I continued, my tone, dropping to a lethal forensic cadence. You sought them out because you were drowning. Your hedge fund has been hemorrhaging client capital for the past 18 months. You attempted to cover your disastrous cryptocurrency margins by quietly siphoning funds from your primary investors. You needed a massive immediate liquidity injection to replace the embezzled money before the quarterly audits caught up with you. So you forged proxy representation documents. You approached Jonathan Sterling claiming you had exclusive negotiating rights for the Austin parcel, hoping you could force my hand later, or simply bury the commission in the corporate paperwork. Richard's face underwent a sudden violent transformation. The aggressive chest-clutching rage he had displayed moments ago vanished, replaced by a sickeningly transparent display of paternal affection. He pushed himself upright, abandoning his previous stance of righteous indignation. "Now hold on a minute," Richard stammered, holding up both hands in a gesture of frantic appeasement. He forced a wide, utterly unnatural smile onto his face. "Audrey, sweetheart, let us all just take a deep breath and look at the bigger picture here. You have to admit, your business acumen has always been extraordinary. I always knew you had the fierce, uncompromising intellect required to pull off a deal of this magnitude. You are a Wilson after all. We are incredibly proud of you. We can handle this internally. We can consolidate this success and move forward as a united family." I raised my right hand, cutting off his desperate rambling instantly. "I am the dumb one, remember?" I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls with absolute finality. "I am the failure who refused to kneel at your feet. The one you explicitly disowned on a Tuesday night because I did not fit into your pristine suburban country club narrative. You do not get to claim my victory, Richard. You do not get to call me sweetheart while you are actively financing the fraudulent lifestyle of the man sitting next to you. You placed your bets. You chose your golden child. Now you get to pay the bridge loan." Patricia let out a loud, shuddering wail, burying her face in her hands. The reality of their financial exposure was finally cracking through her armor of denial. They had leveraged their pristine credit and drained their liquid retirement accounts to underwrite Kendrick's phantom wealth. They were facing total bankruptcy, engineered entirely by their own vanity. Kendrick abruptly pushed his chair back, the legs screeching harshly against the polished floor. He shot up to his feet, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with the primal terror of a trapped animal. He plastered a frantic, placating smile on his face, holding his hands up toward Jonathan Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, this is clearly a massive personal misunderstanding," Kendrick babbled, his voice pitching an octave higher than normal. "This is a family dispute that has regrettably spilled over into your boardroom. I apologize for the unprofessionalism. I will withdraw my brokerage claim immediately. We can just void the preliminary paperwork and pretend this meeting never happened. I will leave right now and let you return to your actual corporate business." Kendrick turned, taking 2 rapid steps toward the exit. He never made it to the 3rd step. Jonathan Sterling moved with surprising speed for a man of his stature. He stepped seamlessly into Kendrick's path, effectively blocking the heavy mahogany doors. The Apex CEO did not look angry. He looked like a man swatting a particularly bothersome insect. Actually, Kendrick Jonathan said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded absolute authority. Representing yourself as a licensed commercial broker to a Fortune 500 company using forged proxy documents is not a family misunderstanding. It is federal wire fraud. Kendrick froze, all the blood draining from his face once again. We have a zero-tolerance policy for corporate espionage and financial deception, Jonathan continued smoothly. My legal team notified the Securities and Exchange Commission and your hedge fund's internal compliance officers exactly 1 hour ago. They are currently locking down your servers and freezing your corporate accounts. Furthermore, corporate security has secured the perimeter of this building. The FBI is waiting for you in the lobby. Kendrick's legs gave out. He did not fall completely to the floor, but he sagged against the heavy mahogany table, his pristine bespoke suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume on a crumbling mannequin. He looked at Jonathan Sterling, then at the 3 stone-faced corporate litigators, and finally at me. He opened his mouth to formulate a defense to spin another elaborate lie, but his voice completely abandoned him. 2 broad-shouldered Apex security guards materialized from the hallway, stepping into the boardroom with quiet, terrifying efficiency. They did not ask Kendrick to leave. They simply flanked him, each gripping one of his upper arms, and began marching him toward the bank of glass elevators. Brittany let out a piercing shriek, scrambling to her feet so fast her chair tipped over backward. She tried to grab Kendrick's sleeve, but a 3rd security guard stepped smoothly into her path, holding up a firm, unyielding hand. She was forced to watch her husband being dragged away, his Italian leather shoes scuffing against the polished floor. I followed them at a leisurely pace, stepping onto the adjacent executive elevator with Jonathan and Marcus. We rode down to the ground floor in comfortable silence, watching the numbers drop on the digital display. When the elevator doors parted, the Apex Semiconductors lobby was bustling with mid-morning activity. Dozens of high-level tech executives, venture capitalists, and industry leaders were crisscrossing the massive marble expanse. They all stopped dead in their tracks as Kendrick was marched out of the elevator bay. Standing directly in the center of the lobby, illuminated by the bright morning sunlight pouring through the glass facade, were 3 FBI agents. They wore dark suits and grim expressions. One agent stepped forward, reciting Kendrick's Miranda rights in a loud, clear voice that carried perfectly across the hushed lobby. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoing off the marble walls was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Kendrick kept his head bowed, his face burning with a humiliating, violent red flush. The man who had spent the last 48 hours declaring himself the undisputed king of real estate was now being paraded past a crowd of genuine billionaires in federal restraints. As they guided him toward the revolving doors, Kendrick's phone began vibrating frantically in his pocket. It was his hedge fund. The compliance officers had moved with ruthless speed. An automated email was already circulating through the financial sector announcing Kendrick's immediate termination for cause. His corporate access was revoked. His professional reputation was instantly vaporized, and every single one of his personal and business assets was frozen, pending a massive federal investigation into his embezzlement. He was walking out of that building with absolutely nothing. Upstairs in the boardroom, Brittany was experiencing her own rapid, suffocating descent into absolute financial terror. The illusion of her staggering wealth had been entirely predicated on Kendrick's imaginary $4 million commission. Without that phantom money, her aesthetic empire was built on a foundation of pure, volatile debt. The reality of her choices crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. The custom-ordered Porsche 911 parked in the garage downstairs was no longer a symbol of her elite status. It was a $150,000 liability, attached to a predatory bridge loan carrying a 22% interest rate. She did not even have the cash to cover the first monthly payment. The pristine cedar-shingled summer house in East Hampton was gone. The aggressive contract she had signed just 48 hours prior required the remaining $2.9 million to be wired by Friday. When she inevitably defaulted, her non-refundable cash deposit of $100,000 would be legally forfeited to the seller. That money was gone, forever evaporated into the ether of her own colossal vanity. She had financed her entire fantasy life using loans guaranteed by my parents, and now the entire house of cards was collapsing in real time. Within a matter of days, Brittany's meticulously curated public image disintegrated. With Kendrick sitting in a federal holding cell and his accounts entirely locked by the government, Brittany was left holding the bag for every single disastrous financial decision they had made. She possessed no income, no savings, and absolutely no means of maintaining her suburban country club lifestyle. The banks moved with terrifying speed, seizing the Porsche directly from her driveway in broad daylight. Her neighbors stood on their manicured lawns, watching the repo men load the luxury sports car onto a flatbed tow truck. Desperation stripped away the last remnants of her pride. Facing immediate crushing bankruptcy, Brittany was forced to liquidate her closet just to keep the electricity turned on in her house. The woman who had bragged about closing $10 million deals was now spending her afternoons photographing her gently used designer handbags, shoes, and silk dresses, uploading them to online resale marketplaces for a fraction of their original cost. She haggled with strangers over $20 discounts on her luxury sunglasses, begging for quick payments to cover her grocery bills. She could no longer rely on Richard and Patricia for a bailout. My parents were drowning in their own catastrophic debt, frantically trying to untangle their pristine credit from Kendrick's fraudulent loans. They had drained a massive portion of their liquid retirement savings to front that Hampton's deposit, treating it as a safe bridge loan. Now the money they had spent decades accumulating was permanently lost, swallowed whole by the very same arrogance they had relentlessly praised in my sister. They were all suffocating under the weight of their own greed, completely isolated and utterly ruined. The total devastation of their carefully constructed reality was absolute and incredibly merciless. I quietly watched this complete destruction unfold with clinical detachment, feeling the profound, unparalleled satisfaction of delivering the final blow. The ultimate cost of their boundless arrogance had finally come due in full. Exactly 1 week later, the heavy oak doors of Marcus Vance's corner executive office swung open. The scent of polished leather and expensive coffee permeated the chilled, climate-controlled air. I sat motionless behind the massive conference table flanked by my legal team. The panoramic windows framed the sunlit Austin skyline, casting me in silhouette. The glass doors parted, and the receptionist escorted my parents inside. Richard and Patricia Wilson did not look like the pristine, untouchable socialites who had ruthlessly dictated my existence. They looked like terrified refugees fleeing a disaster zone. Patricia wore a wrinkled beige trench coat thrown on in a blind panic. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was flat, dull, and unwashed. Her eyes were swollen into purplish slits from days of uninterrupted crying, the skin bruised and raw. Richard shuffled beside her, looking as though he had aged 20 years in 7 days. His shoulders were slumped, his chest hollowed out, and his skin bore a sickly yellowish pallor. The expensive custom-tailored suits he usually wore like armor were gone, replaced by a sagging golf shirt hanging off his diminished frame. They stood frozen at the threshold, staring at the woman they had discarded just days prior. "Please, Audrey!" Patricia wailed, her voice cracking as she stumbled forward and collapsed heavily into a guest chair. She buried her face in her trembling hands, shoulders heaving with violent, uncontrollable sobs. "You have to help us. We have absolutely nothing left. The banks are taking everything." Richard swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly in his throat. He clutched the edge of the mahogany table, knuckles turning white, refusing to meet my eyes. "Kendrick is sitting in a federal detention center," Richard muttered, his voice scraped raw. "His personal and business assets are completely seized. The federal investigators are tearing through his firm, seizing every server and ledger. Brittany is practically catatonic with shock. The repo men took her car from the driveway. The Hamptons deposit is gone forever, and the bank is calling in the massive loans we co-signed." I remained perfectly still, hands resting flat on the cool mahogany surface. "You leveraged your primary residence to finance Brittany's vanity projects," I stated. It was a cold statement of fact, devoid of question or sympathy. "We trusted him," Patricia sobbed, reaching desperately across the table as if trying to grab my hand. I leaned back slightly, pulling out of her reach. We are your family, Audrey. You have $45 million sitting in the bank. You do not even need a fraction of that money to live comfortably. We just need $2 million to cover Kendrick's defense retainers and save our home from immediate foreclosure. You have to remember, family. You have to save us from this nightmare. I looked at the two people who had engineered a lifetime of emotional devastation. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not feel a shred of pity. I felt nothing but the pure, sterile clarity of absolute justice. The silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating, broken only by the ragged sounds of my mother weeping. "Remember, family," I repeated softly, letting the syllables bounce off the glass walls. "That is an incredibly interesting phrase, Mother. Did you remember family when you allowed Kendrick to mock my intelligence at your dinner table? Did you remember family when you sat in silence and watched him belittle my career, offering me a minimum wage clerical job while he planned to steal my property?" Richard flinched violently. "We did not know he was stealing," he protested weakly. "You did not care," I corrected him sharply, my voice dropping an octave, slicing through his pathetic defense. "You only cared about the elite country club prestige he represented. You cared about the designer labels, the imported cars, and the social status. When I tried to tell you the truth, you did not just ignore me, you slapped me across the face." Patricia gasped loudly, shrinking back into the depths of her chair. "You stood in your grand marble foyer. I continued my unwavering gaze, fixed directly on my father, and you told me I was a failure. You told me I was a jealous, bitter disappointment who could not stand to see my sister succeed. You looked me dead in the eyes and explicitly disowned me. You threw me away like garbage because I refused to worship a miserable, embezzling fraud. Audrey, please." Richard begged, thick tears finally spilling over his weathered cheeks, dropping onto his collar. "We made a terrible mistake. We were blind. We are begging you." I reached into the front pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a single silver dime. I placed it gently on the mahogany table. I pressed my index finger against the cool, milled edge of the coin and slid it slowly, deliberately across the highly polished surface. It stopped exactly 2 inches from my father's trembling right hand. "You told me I had 1 week to pack my bags," I said, my voice resonating with a cold, absolute, and terrifying finality. "I suggest you do the same." I stood up smoothly, adjusting my jacket, signaling the definitive end of the meeting. Marcus Vance immediately stepped forward to escort them out. I turned my back on them and walked toward the private exit, never looking over my shoulder, completely deaf to Patricia's screaming, agonized sobs echoing down the corporate hallway. I left them to the total social and financial ruin they had brought upon themselves. They were formally excommunicated from their elite country club, becoming absolute pariahs within their own beloved circle. Destitute and disgraced, my parents were forced to abandon their sprawling mansion, forever swallowed whole by Kendrick's massive debts. They lost everything they valued, while I finally walked forward into a brilliant, independent future, permanently surrounded by the genuine respect and unparalleled success that they could never take away from me again. 6 months passed. The blazing Texas sun beat down on the hood of my truck as I pulled onto the freshly paved driveway of the Apex Agricultural Institute. I shifted the vehicle into park, cut the engine, and pushed the heavy door open. My boots hit the crushed gravel with a satisfying crunch. I took a deep, uninterrupted breath. The scent of turned earth, blooming cover crops, and native wildflowers filled the morning breeze. It smelled like progress. It smelled like absolute freedom. I leaned against the cool, polished steel of my new truck and looked out over the sprawling landscape I had built from nothing but vision and soil. Over 1,000 acres of prime agricultural land stretched out before me in a stunning patchwork of brilliant greens and deep, rich browns. This was no longer just a parcel of dirt waiting to be paved over or leveraged for a fraudulent loan. It was a state-of-the-art research facility, a massive, fully funded beacon of sustainable farming and environmental engineering. We had constructed vast climate-controlled greenhouses, advanced hydroponic testing centers, and acres of experimental crop fields designed to withstand the brutal realities of a changing climate. Every single structure on this property represented a direct, uncompromising rejection of the shallow status-obsessed worldview my family had worshipped. They valued pristine country club lawns, imported luxury vehicles, and empty titles printed on expensive business cards. I valued innovation, resilience, and the undeniable measurable results of hard work. Using a substantial portion of the $45 million sitting safely in my corporate accounts, I had established the Wilson Women in Agriculture Foundation. The initiative was designed with ruthless efficiency and boundless ambition. We provided full-ride educational scholarships, massive startup grants, and state-of-the-art laboratory access to young women entering the agricultural sciences. I wanted to find the brilliant overlooked daughters who had been told their hands were too delicate for dirt. I gave them the financial backing, the expert mentorship, and the elite resources they needed to dominate a male-dominated industry. Every dollar I poured into their research was a dollar my parents could not use to finance another yacht club membership or cover another predatory bridge loan. My wealth was actively building the future while they remained completely trapped in the consequences of their fraudulent past. I pushed away from the truck and walked up the wide, wraparound cedar porch of the main farmhouse. I had commissioned the design myself, stripping away the sterile museum-like pretension of my parents' suburban mansion and replacing it with warmth and soaring structural strength. Thick beams of reclaimed timber supported high vaulted ceilings. Massive windows invited the natural sunlight to spill across wide plank oak floors. It was not built to impress wealthy strangers or intimidate desperate neighbors. It was built to foster genuine connection and relentless innovation. As I opened the heavy wooden door, the rich aroma of coffee greeted me. The kitchen was already bustling with vibrant, authentic life. Marcus Vance stood at the massive soapstone island, rolling up the sleeves of his button-down shirt as he sliced bread. Jonathan Sterling sat at the long farmhouse table reviewing architectural blueprints for our upcoming laboratory expansion with Dr. Elena Rostova, the brilliant lead agronomist I had poached from a prestigious university. They were not scheming. They were not posturing or tearing each other down. They were collaborating. They were laughing. The sound was rich, full, and entirely devoid of the toxic, suffocating anxiety that used to define every single family dinner I had ever attended. There were no passive-aggressive insults hurled across the table. There was no desperate scrambling for a narcissist's conditional approval. There was no screaming, no shattered plates, and absolutely no fake leveraged wealth teetering on the edge of criminal ruin. I poured myself a mug of black coffee and leaned against the doorframe, watching my colleagues and genuine friends exchange ideas with rapid-fire excitement. These people respected my intellect. They valued my uncompromising work ethic. They looked at me and saw a brilliant, formidable leader who had negotiated a massive corporate buyout and subsequently built an empire of her own design. I took a sip of the hot coffee. I thought briefly about the people I had left behind in that corporate conference room. The sudden total silence from my former family was the greatest luxury my money had ever purchased. According to the few legal updates Marcus occasionally provided, their reality had remained exactly as bleak as I had promised. The country club had formally expelled them. Their elite social circle had turned their backs, treating them like contagious pariahs. They were living in a cramped rental apartment on the undesirable side of town, forced to quietly endure the crushing weight of their own manufactured disgrace. I did not feel a shred of pity. I felt only the supreme satisfaction of a life incredibly well lived. I stepped back out onto the wide cedar porch, holding my coffee mug in both hands. The morning sun was climbing higher into the Texas sky, burning away the last remnants of the dew and bathing the sprawling agricultural fields in a brilliant golden light. A team of young researchers drove a utility vehicle down the dirt road, laughing as they headed out to collect the morning soil samples. I watched them go, feeling an unshakable peace settle deep into my bones. The endless pressure to perform for people who would never appreciate me was gone forever. The suffocating weight of their toxic expectations had been obliterated. I finally stood on the foundation of my own making, surrounded by the undeniable proof of my own brilliance. I had claimed my financial freedom. I had secured my ultimate victory. I took one final look at the endless, thriving green horizon stretching out before me, smiled at the beautiful reality I had created, and walked back inside to join my real family.